This, for many of you, will be the most important podcast episode I've ever recorded. And I don't usually ask you to do this, but in this case, I'm going to ask you to please listen to this entire episode if you can and if you have the opportunity to do so. If there's something in your life that you've struggled with, something you've struggled to change, that goal you've had that you've never quite managed to attain, then this episode was made for you. I've been inundated with messages over the last couple of weeks as we approach the New Year's. And these messages all seem to express slight variations of the same critical question, which is, how do I make and break habits in 2023? Our lives are quite simply a manifestation of our habits, the things we repeatedly do. So as many of you have correctly identified, if we can change those habits, we can make and break behaviors, take control of our lives, and finally achieve our most important goals. And in my life, all of the good things have come after me breaking a habit that's had me trapped in sort of a limiting, sometimes toxic cycle in my life. And so habits and studying how they're made and how we make and break them with will has been one of the most important realizations in my life. And in the research of this particular podcast episode, I spent weeks researching and reading every book that I could on the science of making and breaking habits. And in this episode, I'm going to tell you everything that I learned, everything that you need to know from the most up-to-date scientific research on habits and changing behavior. And I do this in the hope that one of you, even one of you, I think it would be worthwhile if I land this effect on one of you can change behavior you've wanted to change and therefore take control of a habit and therefore change your life. Multiple scientific studies have found that most people give up their New Year's resolutions within a month. And according to a recent American study, of the 41% of Americans who made a New Year's resolution, by the end of the year, only 9% were successful in keeping it. 9%. That means if you make a New Year's resolution at the start of the year, by the end of the year, only 9% of you have achieved it. I know this might make you not believe in New Year's resolutions. It might make you think they're pointless, but the study also reveals something that suggests otherwise. 6 months after setting a New Year's resolution, 46% of people who made a resolution were still successful in achieving it. They still had the good habits going, compared to just 4% of people who made a similar goal that wasn't a New Year's resolution. That's a 1,050% increase in the probability of you achieving your goal after 6 months if you set it as a New Year's resolution. Similarly, research by psychologist John Norcross, a very famous American psychologist, has found that resolution makers are more than 10 times as successful in changing their behavior as people who want to change but don't have a formal resolution. Now, I used to be in the camp of thinking that resolutions were an excuse for not making change earlier in the year, but clearly there is something supported by science and psychology that's happening in terms of an intention setting that's actually making New Year's resolutions important. But this podcast is not just about New Year's resolutions. This is about goal setting generally and breaking and making habits. And as I said, 12 months after you've set that New Year's resolution, just that 9% of people are still successful in their resolution. So this podcast episode is also about purely making sure that you are part of that successful 9% by giving you all the science and all the information that you need to be part of that 9%. Almost 50% of you will be successful 6 months after your resolution, but most of you will fail in the next 6 months. The question is why? And I think I know the answer. From reading through hundreds of pages of books and studies on habits and goals and New Year's resolutions, it's clear to me that the first place to start is by explaining exactly what a habit is in the most simple way. Put clearly, habits are behaviors wired so deeply in our brains that we perform them almost automatically. So why do we have habits? Well, they are very handy prehistoric devices that our ancestors have given us because decision-making and thinking itself consumes so much time and energy. And the truth is, if you never made habits, you would be spending so much time and mental energy on routine things like how do I get to work in the morning? Or how do I get from the kitchen in my house to the living room in my house? And if you used all of your time on that, you wouldn't have the capacity to solve unique daily challenges, many of which, once upon a time, presented a real life or death threat. So your brain created habits, which are neurological pathways that fire together so frequently and successfully that your brain wired them together to save you time and energy. Once habits are formed, they're encoded in your brain forever. And this, for me, was a real revelation from reading through all the research. People tend to believe that they can make a bad habit disappear for good. The science suggests otherwise. Let me tell you a story about some rats in a maze and what this recently uncovered about how we can make and break habits. Picture the human brain as an onion composed of layer upon layer of cells. Most of our complex thinking, the things that we really ponder over and the things that really trouble us, happen on the outermost layers of the brain. That's the part of the brain that you're using to listen to me right now. On the evolutionary timescale, the outermost layer was added fairly recently. But as you go deep inside the brain towards the center of the skull, you'll find this golf ball-sized lump of tissues. And this is called the basal ganglia. And this is where all of your habits are stored. For ease, and just so I don't have to pronounce that difficult word again, I'm going to call this your habit control center, your habit control room. And because it's such a prehistoric part of the brain, that same habit control center can be found inside the brain of rats as well. So in order to study the habit control room, world-leading researchers from MIT conducted experiments with rats where they monitored the rats' brains and put them inside a T-shaped maze with some delicious chocolate hidden somewhere inside the maze. The first time the rat was put into the maze, it would wander up and down the center aisle, sniffing corners and scratching at the walls. It could smell the chocolate, but it couldn't quite figure out how to find it. When it reached the top of the T in the maze, it often turned to the right, away from the chocolate, and then wandered left, sometimes pausing for no obvious reason at all. Eventually, in all the studies, the animal found the chocolate. But there was no clear pattern in the search, the wandering behavior that happened before that. On the surface, it looked like each rat was taking a leisurely, unthinking, casual stroll. But when they look at brain scans of those rats at that exact moment, it tells a completely different story. While each animal wandered through the maze for the first time, its brain in particular, that habit control center in the core of the brain, was working on overdrive. Each time a rat sniffed the air or scratched the wall, its brain exploded with activity as if it was analysing each new scent, each new sight, and each new sound. And although the rat looked calm, the rat's brain was ferociously processing everything. But once the rat had found the chocolate once, when placed back into the maze, the brain activity completely disappeared. The rat was now on autopilot. It no longer needed to process things. It no longer needed to think. A habit had been formed. So the habit control center takes over, seemingly automatically retrieving the stored information on how to get from where it is at the start of the maze to the chocolate. And as if possessed by the habit control center, the rat glided straight to the chocolate without pause. In the same way that we all glide unconsciously to work or to the gym or to that familiar part of the house without thinking every single morning when we wake up, without having to consider the directions to get there. So because the rat was on autopilot, its brain was freed up to think about other things. So theoretically, the rat could glide to the chocolate while also pondering a complex problem it was having at work that day. By navigating the maze over and over, the rats formed what scientists now call a habit loop. And there are 3 steps in a habit loop. Step 1 is you need a cue, which in this case was a click sound they played when they dropped the rat into the maze. This cue in turn makes the habit control center activate the stored routine. And step 2 is a routine. The routine for the rats was the walk through the maze towards the chocolate. And step 3 is you need a reward, which is of course the delicious chocolate at the end of the maze. The cue, routine, reward is the habit loop. The habit loop happens to be the same for humans also. And I've mentioned this over the years before, but my father smoked for 30 years of his life, but he only ever smoked in the car. Never at parties, never at home, never at work, only in the car. And in all honesty, it would really upset me because I think I grew up with this kind of existential feeling or worry that my dad was going to die someday because he smoked, because I'd heard of all the things they say about smoking and the carcinogens and why it's bad for you. So seeing your father do that was quite troubling for me as a young man. And I tried, I think, in subtle ways to encourage him to quit. But nothing seemed to work until one day, something I accidentally did led to him making the decision to quit smoking forever. His cue, routine, reward habit loop is a prime example of everything I've said. He would sit in the car, and the car itself was the cue. Sometimes cues are just context or environment. And that cue caused a neurological pathway in his brain to begin to fire up in his habit control center of his brain. And seemingly without thinking, as if possessed, he would automatically reach down into the car door and pull out his packet of miniature cigars, which was his routine. That reach down was his routine, like the rats walking through the maze. And then he'd wind the window down and light one up. And the nicotine, which releases a feel-good chemical in the brain called dopamine, in under just 20 seconds was the reward. Cue, craving, routine, reward. But then one day, when I was 18 years old, after dropping out of university to build my first tech startup, I was reading a book called Hooked by Nir Eyal, who's a previous guest on this podcast, that explains how big social media companies and tech companies get their users to form the habit of using their products every day and become addicted to their products every day by using the same habit loop. While I was reading that book, I happened to stop off at home back in the southwest in Plymouth, and I accidentally left it in my father's bathroom. Now, for whatever reason, like many of us, my dad loves to read while he's on the toilet. And so he ends up picking up the book, learning about that habit loop, and finally understanding the cue, routine, and reward that was causing him to smoke. And so he went into his car some weeks later. He didn't actually tell me this until months after he'd quit smoking. He went into his car, took the cigarettes out, and put these miniature lollipops, these little chuppa lollipops, in the cigar case, in the place where it was. And my father, after that, never smoked ever again. The habit loop had been interrupted. A new, less addictive habit had been formed in its place. And within that, my father's health outcomes had drastically improved. Going back to the original point about how just 9% of us will successfully keep our New Year's resolutions, I think the study with the rats, the maze, and the chocolate may explain why. You've probably heard the phrase, old habits die hard. And from the scientific perspective, that couldn't be more true. And I think this is good news for your good habits, and I think this is probably bad news for your bad habits. In that study with the rats, researchers eventually removed the chocolate, and the rats still ran exactly the same way through the maze. The researchers went one step further then and poisoned the chocolate with a chemical that makes the brain of the rat experience nausea. And the rats still ran the exact same way through the maze, even though they stopped eating the chocolate, experiencing the reward at the end of it. The routine was still the same. The cue was still the same. Interestingly, the researchers then found a way to interfere with the rat's brain and shut off that automatic habit loop that was causing it to take the left journey through the maze. And it worked. Instead of running left through the maze, the rat started to run right through the maze. But then, interestingly, when the researchers interfered with the rat's brain again and disabled that habit loop of turning right through the maze, the rats instantaneously went back to the previous habit of running left through the maze. And they did it at the same speed, certainty, and accuracy as they'd done it previously once they'd learnt that habit. They didn't need to learn the old pathway through the maze once again. And their brain scans showed that they weren't thinking about it. They were back on autopilot. And researchers were shocked because what this says, and I quote the researchers, quote, "The original habit had never, ever really been forgotten. It was always lurking somewhere there in their brain." And I think, ladies and gentlemen, this might be one of the biggest misconceptions that people have about habits. You never get rid of them. They're never forgotten. You know, the same is true about so many things in our lives. I reflect on that and think about some of the traumatic experiences I've had. That evidence remains ingrained in our brain because it's useful for us. It's like if you go back maybe thousands of years, knowing that a lion was something to run from was something that was important for your cognition to never forget. And this for me also explains why 91% of us that set a New Year's resolution to form a new habit or to create a new behavior will fail within 12 months. Habits can't be broken. But, and this is the good news, they can be forgotten and they can be replaced. The scientists in the rat maze chocolate study said, and I quote, "These results suggest that the brain can quickly toggle between an old habit and a new habit. What's really stunning is that old habits are totally intact and retrievable in an instant. Habits can be broken, they can be replaced, but they can't be removed forever." So when you think about the habit loop and the cue, routine, reward cycle, it becomes really clear why 91% of people won't keep their New Year's resolutions and why 25% of us won't even keep the resolution for 1 week, because their old bad habits are still there. They never die. And the same cues are still there in their lives, whether it's an environmental cue like my dad, or it's a chemical cue in the case of my former partner, where every time we went for a glass of wine, she got the craving to go for a cigarette. And the routine is, of course, the same. You know, the cigars are still there in my dad's car door, or the sweets are still there in the drawer downstairs in my house. And the rewards on offer are all the same too, and equally delicious and compelling. So it's all well and good understanding this and even interrupting the habit cycle like my dad successfully did with those lollipops in the car drawer. But the answer to sustaining a new habit is more complicated. To get those new neurological pathways to fire together and therefore wire together, scientific studies conducted all around the world in humans and animals say that you need just a little bit more. One thing we need, and all the science was clear on this, is we need repetition. You've heard this before. Some studies say 21 days to form a new habit. Some studies say 66 days. The truth is, and I read a real plethora of research, is it seems to depend. For some people, it happens in a shorter period of time. For some people, depending on the habit, depending on who you are, it can take up to hundreds of days to form the new habit. The director of the University of Oregon Social and Affective Neuroscience Lab, Elliot Berkman, said, since habits take practice and repetition to form, the same is true when it comes to breaking them. In order to break those unwanted habits and make new ones, whatever they're going to be, I'm going to give you the 5 rules of making and breaking habits that have the most scientific evidence to support them from what I found. The things that resonated with me the most that I honestly didn't know. With these 5 rules in mind, you'll drastically increase your chances of breaking any bad habit that you have and making any new habit that you desire to have. So rule number 1, stress is your puppet master. Many habits, as I'm sure you can relate, including smoking or excessive sugar consumption, involve the brain's dopamine or reward system. And dopamine, if you understand what that chemical is a feel-good chemical that transmits signals between neurons in the brain. The first time you engage in a new rewarding behavior, you get a euphoric feeling from doing it as a result of that dopamine release. This leads to changes in both the connections between neurons in the brain and the system responsible for action, and can largely account for why we start to form bad habits in the first place, or habits that we don't necessarily want. Many of these rewarding things like sugar or substances are powerful and chemically addictive as well, which means the habit is even harder to unanchor. And our psychological reaction to them in this day and age can be linked all the way back to evolution. In the caveman days, in the cavewoman days, meat wasn't salted. There wasn't such a thing as candy or sweets, and highly addictive substances like tobacco have only been growing in the wild for nearly 8,000 years. But it wasn't until about 2,000 years ago that we started picking tobacco up and chewing it and smoking it. Russell Poldrack, who's the professor of psychology at Stanford University, says, our brains are not well equipped to deal with the big rush one gets from these sorts of things. And if you just look at the high street around you, humans have quite clearly designed our entire society around activities that will give us this habit-forming dopamine response in our brains. If you go into a corner shop, I can get crisps, again, that releases dopamine, sweets, adult magazines, cigars, cigarettes, booze. And they sell so well because they cause that all-important dopamine release in our brain, which acts as the reward part of the habit loop. So we keep on coming back to the corner shop for more and more and more, which means more shops have popped up on the high street, catering to that addictive habit loop and that reward part of the habit loop. And if you think about your high street, most of the shops are selling sugar, caffeine, or highly processed foods for this very reason. And I've always wondered if highly processed foods like French fries, pizzas, cheesecakes, all of my favorite things, milkshakes, trigger the same neurological habit loop as smoking or other addictive drugs. And new findings published in the Journal of Clinical Nutrition finally suggest that they do. Scientists studied a group of overweight men between the ages of 18 and 35 years old. The men were given similar milkshakes, however, one had a high glycemic index and then one had a low glycemic index. The glycemic index is basically an indicator of how fast blood sugar glucose levels spike after consuming certain foods. Carbohydrates such as cookies and baked goods and pasta and white bread and white rice all have a high glycemic index. They're quickly digested, while low glycemic carbohydrates, which include whole grains and vegetables and fruits and legumes and unprocessed grains, are broken down in a much slower way. 4 hours after the two groups of men were given the milkshakes, they had an MRI brain scan which analysed the activity in that reward part of the brain. And subjects in the experiment who consumed the high glycemic milkshakes had spikes in their blood sugar levels, which then plummeted 4 hours later. And as their blood glucose levels decreased, those participants developed excessive hunger, and their brain scans demonstrated high levels of activity in a region of the brain which is associated with addiction. And this really brings me to a point from that professor at Stanford where he said, you're more likely to do the thing you don't want to do when you're stressed out, i.e., you're more likely to go in search of that dopamine hit in the form of sugar, processed food, drugs, porn, alcohol, whatever it might be, if you're stressed out. Therefore, one of the most unobvious but important things you can do to make a new habit stick and form enough repetitions in that early phase to make the neurons fire together and wire together is to keep your stress levels low, especially in that critical early phase while you're forming that new habit loop. I.e., if you're trying to form a new habit, whatever it might be, go to the gym, whatever it might be, and if you want to be in that 9% of people that have achieved their New Year's resolution 12 months from now, don't just focus on the habit. Focus on your stress, because high stress levels are one of the forces acting against your willpower as it relates to habits. And I think we can all relate. I think we can all sort of intuitively know that when we're stressed, we tend to reverse back to bad habits, and that's exactly why. They've proven this over and over again in studies that stressed people make bad choices as they go in that desperate search of things that will make them feel good in the short term. And because of this, stressed people are very bad at delaying gratification. And being able to delay gratification, as I've come to learn in my own life, is one of the real keys of achieving any goal we have in life, business, relationships, health, or fitness. So what is delayed gratification? I've heard that word for most of my life, but what is it and why is it important? What is the research? What are the studies that prove the importance of it? And how do I do it? Well, the definition of delayed gratification, according to science, is the ability to delay an impulse for an immediate reward to receive a more favorable reward at a later time. And just on that point of delayed gratification and how important it is, one of the most important studies I've ever read was from the 1960s. A famous Stanford professor named Walter Mischel began conducting a series of important studies around the concept of delayed gratification. During his experiments, Mischel and his team tested hundreds of children, most of them between the ages of 4 and 5 years old, and he revealed what we now believe to be one of the most important characteristics of success, not just in health, not just in work, but also in life. And they called this, and this is a very famous experiment, so I imagine most of you will know this experiment. They called this the marshmallow experiment. I think certain TV shows in America have mimicked this, and it's really quite funny to watch. I remember it went viral. A form of it went viral on social media a couple of years ago. The experiment began by bringing each child into a private room and sitting them down on a chair and placing one marshmallow on the table in front of them. The child was then given a choice by the researcher. The researcher said, I'm going to leave the room for a while and I'll come back in. And you can eat this tasty marshmallow if you want to, if that's your choice. But if you don't want to eat it, and if you don't eat it, I'll give you a second one when I come back in. So the choice was simple. 1 treat right now, or 2 treats when the researcher comes back in later. The researcher left the room for 15 minutes. Some kids, as you can imagine, jumped up and put that marshmallow straight in their mouth. They'd eaten it before he'd even left the room. Others, quite hilariously, struggled around in their chair and tried to restrain themselves from eating it, but eventually gave in a few minutes later. And finally, a few of the children did manage to wait the entire time. And this study became known as the marshmallow experiment, but it wasn't the funny reactions that made it famous. The mind-blowing and fascinating part came many, many years later. As the years rolled past, and those same children became fully formed adults, the researchers conducted a follow-up experiment, and they tracked each child's progress in a number of different areas of their life. And what they found was astonishing. The children who were willing to delay gratification and waited to receive the second marshmallow from the researcher ended up having higher exam scores later in life. They ended up having lower levels of substance abuse, lower likelihoods of childhood obesity, better social skills as reported by their parents and friends, and generally better scores in most areas across their entire lives. And importantly, the kids that didn't reach for the marshmallow and became successful adults also had much better responses to stress. They were likely less stressed kids, and they were probably less stressed adults. And it's interesting to try and establish causation between there. Clearly, stress undermines our ability to regulate impulsivity. Stress hijacks the brain. And if you're stressed, you won't be able to delay gratification. You will continue to reach for those marshmallows, and you might not, therefore, achieve your goals. The researchers in the marshmallow experiment continued to follow each child for more than 40 years. And year over year over year, the group who waited patiently for the second marshmallow succeeded in every capacity of their lives that they were measuring. In other words, the series of experiments proved that our ability to delay gratification was critical for success in life, in our love lives, in our work. And we know that stress is a key factor preventing us from delaying gratification. You'll see this everywhere in your life. I've seen it in mine. If you're able to delay the gratification of buying sweets or desserts or cake or ice cream on your way home from work, that increases your chance of eating healthier when you get home. And there's countless other examples. Therefore, and this is, I guess, my big conclusion. Therefore, and this is not obvious, but at the start of your journey to creating that new habit, you have to focus on the simple stuff that makes your life as stress-free as possible. And those foundations are, it's been proven by science, more sleep, exercise regularly, and opt for stress reduction techniques like meditation or massages or walking or running or whatever helps you to deregulate, de-stress, decompress, because scientists have shown that alone will increase your willpower and drastically improve your chances of cementing new habits and achieving your big goals in your life. And it's funny because most people wouldn't think of sleep as an important factor in achieving most of their habits, but the science seems to be incredibly clear on this. According to world-leading sleep expert and neurologist Kathy Goldstein, sleep plays a major factor in the success or failure of the most popular New Year's resolutions. For those trying to lose weight or to eat healthier, a lack of sleep decreases leptin, which is the hormone that makes you feel full. It also boosts something called ghrelin, aka the hunger hormone, which increases appetite, promotes fat storage, and causes poor food choices. And for those of you like me that have goals associated with work and becoming better in your work, or you want to get a promotion or whatever it might be, the science is clear. A lack of sleep reduces your productivity. And additionally, sleep-deprived people in management roles are described as less ethical, not as alert, not as motivated, and not as cheerful. And for those of you that might want to boost your social lives, a lack of sleep contributes to poor mood, markedly worse social interactions in all of the studies. And for those looking to quit smoking, like my dad, a lack of sleep is tied to higher rates of nicotine dependency. Sleep is one of these foundations that we often overlook, and it's become a huge priority in my life. So if you want to make or break a new habit, rule number 1 in my 5 rules is to forget all the complicated tips and tricks and hacks and focus on those basics. You'll succeed if you feel good, if you're not overstressed, and if you've slept. Quick one. Intel are now one of the sponsors on this podcast, and in the coming weeks, I'm going to be telling you about the V Pro platform. Intel V Pro is built for business. Essentially, what this means to me is that it's built for a hybrid working mode, perfect for my businesses, as we quite literally are working all over the world in offices, in co-working spaces, in airports. And the V Pro platform has been super helpful in allowing me to connect and collaborate seamlessly with all of my teams all around the world, all of the time. It truly makes hybrid working far easier. So it's something that I think businesses will all be able to benefit from. For me, the benefits are second to none. Its industry-leading performance makes it the perfect solution for any business. So if you'd like to find out more, and I really think you should, head to intel.co.uk/vpro and let me know how you get on. Quick one from our longest standing sponsor, Huel. I can't tell you over the last, really it's been about 2.5 years. It was really post-pandemic, how much my health has become such a huge priority in my life. Huel has been probably the most important partner in my health journey, because I've been in the boardrooms, I've been to their offices tens of times. I've seen how they make their decisions on nutrition. And that's why it's such a wonderful thing to be able to talk to this audience about a brand and a product that is so unbelievably linked to my values and the place I am in my life of valuing the gym, exercise, movement, my mind, my breathing, and all of those things. And most importantly, my nutrition. That is the role Huel plays. And so every time I get to read these ads out, I do it with such passion because I really, really believe every word I'm saying. And I absolutely love the brand. So if you haven't already tried Huel and you've been resistant to my pestering, then give it a go and let me know how you get on. Rule number 2, know your cues. Incredibly important and often overlooked. As we've said previously, and as I've indicated from that rat maze chocolate experiment, but also in the example of my father and my ex-girlfriend, habits have 3 main parts: a cue, a routine, and a reward. Cues are often just the context where you tend to engage in that behavior. So if you want to break a habit, step number 1 has to be getting crystal clear on exactly what your cues are. If you're aware of it, you're empowered to do something about it, because the science shows that you're most likely to relapse to an old bad habit in the context of when you usually perform that bad habit. Knowing your cues and your triggers can help you to avoid them. And scientists say that if a smoker disposes of a cue, and it could be an item, a cue item, like an ashtray or something like that, that reminds them of that habit, they're significantly more likely to give up smoking. So with this in mind, capitalizing on a major life change can also help you to break or make unhealthy habits. Often people think, like, when you're moving to a new city or starting a new job or you're joining a new social environment, we might think that's bad timing to start thinking about making new habits because we're so busy. But science suggests the complete opposite. Think about it. If our cues come from our environment, usually, your current environment is full of hundreds of different cues and triggers. Your home, your commute, your dog walk, your social context, even your friends. Collectively, all of those environmental factors probably hold hundreds, maybe even thousands of cues and triggers that lead to routines that get you rewards. And those cues and triggers and routines and rewards, those cues are holding your bad habits in place. So if you're used to lighting up a cigarette on your way home from work, for instance, or stopping off at that fast food spot on your way home from work, moving to a new city gives you a chance to break that cue. It removes the cue, which means that you can remove the routine and hopefully the reward. And that's something that I think about a lot, which is whenever I change my environment, whether it's moving into a new place or going to a new city or making new friends or doing something new, how can I use that sort of blank canvas as a way to start creating new habits? Can I put my fitness shoes in a certain obvious place so that I'm cued every day to go to the gym? Can I remove the sweet drawer from my house completely and replace it with a healthy drawer full of vegetables and fruits? Those kinds of things. And also when we go to new places, when we spend time abroad for prolonged periods of time, that's a great opportunity, despite what people tend to think, to really kickstart new habits and to shed old ones. Rule number 3, don't focus on stopping bad habits, focus on replacing them. It is, and I've experienced this over and over again in my life, it's impossibly difficult to actually stop a habit. So I delved into the science to try and figure out why and what happens when we try and stop doing a bad habit. And the science shows that focusing too much on stopping something often makes you rebound eventually and do it more. We are action-orientated creatures, not inaction-orientated creatures. And some studies have shown that the more you suppress your thoughts, the more likely you are to think about those things over and over again and therefore revert back to a bad habit. One study done in 2008 on the topic of appetite found that those who suppressed their thoughts about eating chocolate exhibited behavioral rebound effects where they consumed significantly more chocolate than those who didn't. And I tell you what, I can relate. I can think of multiple times in my life where I've made a pledge to myself to quit something. And because I'm so focused on quitting that thing, when I eventually break, maybe because I'm stressed, maybe because of another factor, I end up swinging so far the other way because I've sort of held myself away from that thing that I craved. And similarly, a 2010 study published in the Psychological Science found that smokers who tried to restrain their thoughts about smoking ultimately wound up thinking about smoking even more. And this reminds me of a small piece of advice my driving instructor said to me when I was 18 years old, 19 years old. He said, "Stephen, the car goes where your eyes are looking. If you want to avoid crashing into the cars on the side of the road, don't focus on the cars on the side of the road because you'll veer towards the parked cars on the side of the road. So look forward into the distance where you want the car to go." And this seems like a fairly fitting analogy for what we're talking about. And for the third law of breaking and making habits, you end up doing the thing you're focusing on. So don't focus on stopping smoking. Focus on the behavior you want to replace it with. The director of the University of Oregon Social and Effective Neuroscience Lab, Elliot Berkman, who I mentioned earlier, he said something which is really, really pertinent to this. He said, if you're a smoker and you tell yourself not to smoke, your brain still hears smoke. Conversely, if you tell yourself to chew gum every time you want a cigarette, your brain has a more positive, action-orientated goal to focus on. And this explains why those miniature lollipops that my dad put in the side of the car when he quit smoking was such a good idea. He didn't just take the cigarettes out of the car altogether, which might have caused him to rebound and think about them a lot. He replaced them with a new action-orientated habit for his brain to latch onto and focus on, which in his case was, of course, sucking lollipops. Similarly, scientists suggest that if 5 p.m., for example, has been linked to that glass of wine that you've been trying to knock for a while. Don't just remove the glass of wine from your life. Instead, double down on hydration and make sure the fridge is stocked with seltzers and cold water and lemon, just like my dad did. But as I said at the start of this podcast, doing this just once won't be enough. Forming a new habit takes time and commitment. So don't feel discouraged if it takes longer than you might expect. I remember looking at because I think we've all grown up in this world where they say that forming a new habit takes 20-something days. People have repeated this to me over and over again. It takes 20-something days. I think when I started doing the keto diet for a little while, people said to me, just do it for 25 days and you'll be, the habit will stick. So I looked into some of the science around this, and a 2010 study published in the European Journal of Social Psychology found it took an average of 66 days for a behavior to change. But as I said at the start, this varies wildly. For some people, it's 20 days, and in some cases, it was 250 days. So I think that's largely BS. And I think the more important thing is actually going to be revealed in rule number 5 of these 5 rules. But before we get to number 5, which really was a light bulb epiphany moment for me, I'm going to give you rule number 4 for forming, making and breaking the habits you want to in 2023. Rule number 4 is you need a better reason to quit. Neuroscientists have shown that even if you replace a quote unquote bad habit with a better one, sometimes the original habit will have a much stronger biological reward than the thing you substituted it for. And if you think about what I said earlier, the habit's always going to be there. So even if you substitute it, like the scientist said in the rat experiment, it can so easily just toggle back. It never disappears. The pathway, the neurons are fired together. They are wired together. For example, in the case of my dad, who I keep mentioning throughout this podcast, his brain obviously knows that the lollipop is not as addictive as the nicotine he's getting from those cigars, and therefore it won't produce the same euphoric neurological feeling in the reward centers of his brain as those cigars did. But this is where the importance of having an intrinsic motivation comes into play. And listen, an intrinsic motivation is a phrase any avid listener of this podcast has probably heard me say a lot. The word intrinsic is one of my favorite phrases. It's basically a reason for doing something that is genuinely and personally important to you, not something that you're doing for external rewards or payment. We call that an extrinsic motivation. And for me, and you've heard me bang on about this, because it genuinely changed my life. My reason for getting healthy and cutting junk food out of my diet was always shallow. As I've said before, I wanted to have a 6-pack for summer. So for the first few months of every single year, when I made that New Year's resolution, I would work out every single day and I would eat healthy food obsessively until one of 2 things happened. Until either I got in shape or until summer ended. Then I would immediately revert back, like those rats who started running left again. I would immediately revert back to my old habit of eating junk food and avoiding any form of exercise. And it wasn't until 2020, when a certain virus spread across the world, tragically killing millions of people in every corner of the world, that I got to see, as the most imprinting, alarming example, how fragile health is and how fragile life is. And that's when, if I think about it now, that's when things changed in my mind. I realized, like a wonderful epiphany, that my health and fitness were the most important thing in my life, because it is literally the first foundation. I've said this before. Think of it like this table. Everything you care about sits on this table. Your career, your family, your goals, all of your future dreams, everything. Now, you can remove any of the things on the table and you still have everything else. I can, God forbid, get rid of my dog Pablo and I still have everything else on the table. I can get rid of my career and I still have everything else that's on the table. But if I get rid of the table, everything else falls. I lose everything. My health is the table. My health is my first foundation. Everything in my life is contingent on it. So logically, it must be every single day when I wake up in the morning, it must be my first priority. And that one realization changed my life. It gave me like this huge, powerful, intrinsic reason to focus on my health, which was not just 6-packs and abs and chasing women or whatever it might be. And now we sit here 3 years later and I'm in the best shape of my life. I've managed to kind of stick at it. Of course, I have ups and downs and peaks and troughs and whatever else. And some days where I'm, in the drawer at 2 a.m. eating too much chocolate or whatever. We're all human. None of us are perfect. And I think it's important to communicate that. I have all the same struggles. Some days my motivation's low, some days it's a bit higher. But if we zoom out, and I think that's the key, if we zoom out, I've made drastically healthier choices. I'm in the best shape of my life. I've cut out a lot of the things that I know are bad for me. And that really had a bad impact on my body and my mind. And that's all because I finally got a better reason. And my point here is sometimes your good habits don't stand a chance because you don't have a good enough reason. Like me, you want a six-pack and you want it for bad reasons. One of my favorite quotes of all time is, change happens when the pain of staying the same becomes greater than the pain of making a change. I.e., people don't change until it's easier to change than it is to stay the same. And unfortunately, this means people sometimes need a real health scare. They need a death in their family or some kind of other tragedy until they have a strong enough reason, strong enough evidence to make a change. And that is tremendously sad. It's been the case for me too many times in my life that I've had to lose something to make a change, or I've had to lose something to learn the value of it. For me, the events of 2020 were that tragedy. I sincerely hope that you guys that are listening to this won't need a tragedy of your own to realize what truly matters to you. Or to give you that intrinsic motivation to live more aligned with the person you want to be and the values that you have. Rule number 5, maybe the most important. I'll let you decide. Rule number 5, and this is again slightly controversial, slightly unconventional, is willpower is not enough. This is maybe the most fascinating study I read of all of them because it really made me ponder and it kind of disrupted my thinking on willpower and strength and mental strength and motivation. And it's probably a huge reason why 91% of people don't stick to their resolutions. Dozens of studies show that willpower is the single most important habit for individual success. And this is true. But for a long time, people thought that willpower is a skill that you could develop and that therefore remains constant forever, until Mark Muravan, a PhD scientist, argued that if willpower is a skill, then why does it not remain constant throughout the whole day or even throughout the whole week? Why does willpower seem to fluctuate? He conducted an experiment to prove that willpower, like all of the muscles in our body, gets exhausted the more we use it throughout the day. In his lab, he did a fairly simple thing. He set up one bowl of freshly baked cookies, and then he set up another bowl of radishes. And listen, everybody hates radishes, including me. Well, put them up, chop them up, put them in a salad. Maybe I don't hate them. They're good for you. But anyway, in this example, most people would prefer hot, delicious cookies than radishes, right? And the participants in the study were divided into two groups. One group was instructed to eat the delicious cookies and ignore the radishes. The other group was instructed to ignore the delicious cookies and to eat the radishes. I know which group I would have rather been in. After 5 minutes into that experiment, the researchers re-entered the room and gave both groups of people a puzzle. But the thing is, the puzzle was impossible to complete. And here's what happened. The people that had eaten the cookie with their unused reservoir of willpower, because they hadn't had to use their willpower, they hadn't had to use their restraint, looked way more relaxed when they were trying to solve that impossible puzzle, and they would continue to try and solve it over and over and over again. Some worked for more than half an hour before the researcher told them to stop. On average, the cookie eaters spent almost 19 minutes trying to solve that puzzle before they eventually quit, on average. Now, in the case of the radish eaters, with their depleted willpower because they had to practice restraint, they acted completely differently. It was a completely opposite story. They vented as they worked to try and solve that puzzle. They got frustrated. One even complained that the whole experiment was a waste of time. Some of them put their heads on the table, closed their eyes, and one of them even snapped at the researcher when she came back in. On average, the radish eaters worked for roughly 8 minutes, 60% less. They tried to solve the problem of the puzzle, the impossible puzzle, for 60% less time than the cookie eaters before quitting. And when I read this study, I was shocked, but I'm a skeptic. So I tried to think of why this might be. I tried to think of other factors. And I thought of maybe it's the sugar. Maybe the sugar in the cookies are causing them to work harder. But when you look at other studies where there isn't sugar, anytime someone's practicing restraint, the same effects are seen. Willpower isn't just a skill, it's a muscle. Like the muscles in your arms or your legs, and it gets tired. And it gets tired as it's forced to work harder. So there's less power left over for all of the other things. And since that cookie study was published, I think in 1998, numerous studies have built a case for the exact same thing. They call it the willpower depletion theory. In one incredible example, which is almost hard to believe, volunteers who were asked to suppress their feelings as they watched an emotional movie gave up sooner on a test that they did after of physical stamina than volunteers who watched the film and were allowed to react in whatever way they wanted to. So if you were asked to restrain yourself, when you then did a physical exercise, people gave up sooner in the physical exercise. In a similar study which pointed at the exact same conclusion, people who were asked to suppress certain thoughts were less able to stifle laughter in a follow-up test which was designed to make them giggle. So if the science here is correct, which I suspect it is, and willpower is a limited resource, it's really obvious that the more pressure and restrictions and strain you put on yourself when you're trying to make a new habit and break old ones, the less the chance you have of achieving them, the more chance you have of rebounding and relapsing. This is why unsustainable crash diets just don't work. This is why anytime you feel like you're depriving yourself of something that you really want, you nearly always end up failing and falling into relapse. This is why in a 2014 study, almost 40% of people said they failed on their New Year's resolutions because the goal was too unsustainable or unrealistic. And 10% said they failed because they had too many goals. This is why it's so important as you think about what goals you're setting to make sure that they are small enough and achievable enough to become sustainable without the need for major sacrifice, which will deplete your willpower reserves. And that for me was a real revelation, because I think about all the habits I've tried to set. You know, when I talked about trying to get a six-pack for summer, think about what I said. I obsessively ate healthy food. I went to the gym every day for 6 months. My willpower eventually became depleted and I rebounded like a yo-yo, like you've never seen before. And this is why you shouldn't try and give up every bad habit that you have at the same time. This is why less goals increase the chance of completing all of your goals. Because with too many big, unrealistic, sacrifice-centric goals, your willpower will be under tremendous, unsustainable strain. It will run out. You will fail and it will rebound. And this is also why so many psychologists and scientists have found that the best way to create a new habit isn't by depriving yourself of all rewards. That is totally counterproductive according to the science. It's by finding new rewards, healthier rewards, less addictive rewards, but nonetheless making sure that you still reward yourself in some way every day along the way. And I'm going to do something that I didn't plan to do. I'm going to give you a bonus rule number 6, because this point I've been talking about ever since I learned it. I think I've been pestering everyone. I saw Jay Shetty earlier on and I peppered him with it. Then I saw my assistant, I peppered her with it. I think the 2 guys in the room recording this podcast with me, I've peppered them with it as well. This is something that I thought was unbelievable because it's so easy. It's so simple. It's a 1-second exercise, which the science has shown is tremendously effective in helping you to create a new habit. So bonus rule number 6, the secret power of posing a question. I'm going to give you one last short tip that I found buried within the scientific research that blew my mind and blew my mind again, so much so that I had to check it was true. It's called the question behavior effect. It's an incredible, simple phenomenon in which asking people about performing a certain behavior drastically influences whether they do it in the future or not. The effect has been shown to last for more than 6 months after you ask a simple question. You know, going back to one of the real pioneering pieces of research on this, a study published in the Journal of Consumer Psychology says, asking the right question is the key to behavior change. So instead of telling someone else what to do, or if it relates to a goal you're trying to achieve for yourself, instead of just saying what you're going to do, for example, if you want to go to the gym, instead of saying, I want to go to the gym, or I'm going to go to the gym, it's way more effective, according to the science, to ask yourself or a person a simple question, which is, are you going to go to the gym? Across repeated psychological studies, if an individual isn't exhibiting healthy behavior, if they're then asked a question about that behavior, or they ask themselves a question about that behavior, it serves as a reminder of their choices. Direct questions in their studies influenced people to cheat less, to exercise more, to volunteer more, and to even recycle more. And the key here isn't to ask any question or to ask it in any way. It's to ask a question which encourages a definitive yes or no answer. Really interestingly, researchers found that the question behavior effect was most effective and most powerful when the question was administered via computer or a paper and pencil survey. And I guess you're wondering why that works. Why isn't it effective to say it to somebody? Why is it better when a medium that can't respond, that has a yes or no box on it, is more effective than asking your friend or yourself the same question? And there are several theories about why the question behavior effect works, but most people believe it's related to something called cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is where your ideal self, the person you want to be, doesn't match up with your real self, which is who you actually are. So although you might want to be a healthy person, your behavior, your actions might not be aligning with that. They might not be aligning with the actions of a fit, healthy person. So if someone asks you the question, or if you ask yourself the question, are you going to go to the gym today? Saying no would cause a lot of mental discomfort. To ease your discomfort, you're likely going to say yes. Then once you say yes, your prediction that you're going to exercise that day becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, because the question has reminded you of who you want to be, the path to becoming that person. Are you going to go to the gym today? And you've set an intention to walk that path. It's a simple question, is a reminder, it delivers the path, and it gives you the opportunity to send a clear intention to yourself and to whoever else of what you're going to do. And the reason why this works even more effectively when answering yes or no to the question, especially on a computer or a pen or a paper, is because these binary choices in a yes or no box or on a computer or on a piece of paper, wherever it might be, don't allow for clarification and excuses, both of which we all know allow us to wiggle away from confronting the reality of who we want to be, the path of getting there, and establishing an intention. Well, you might want to explain, Steve, I might say to myself, I plan on starting to exercise next month, or I'm going to stop sugar next month, or I'll go to the gym once my schedule allows me to do so. A yes or no question doesn't give any room to create an excuse, a justification, and to deceive yourself. You need to commit. If it's yes or no, you need to commit one way or the other. So the next time you're tempted to make excuses for your behavior, and we all do it, I do it every day, or to lecture someone else about what they should do differently, try this instead. Try asking yourself, and I did this last night, it was 11:30 p.m. at night or whatever, a long day, and I'm sat there in my little office upstairs and I think, I know I should go on the Peloton. I've not been on the Peloton in a little while. So I asked myself the question. I said, Stephen, are you going to go on the Peloton? And like a bit of a weirdo, I replied to myself, yes. Use it on yourself. Ask yourself a clear yes or no question about an area of your life that you're struggling in daily to find motivation in. Or if you want to help someone in an empathetic and effective way, instead of saying you should quit smoking, you can raise the question with them and ask them, are you going to quit smoking? Are you going to apply for that new job? And ask them only for a yes or no answer if you can. Obviously, remember to have empathy, because sometimes questions come with them something which isn't revealed unless the person reads between the lines, which is judgment. And we don't want to lead with judgment. That's not a good thing. But raising awareness, raising someone else's awareness of their behavior with this gentle confrontation of their ideal self can lead to significant behavior change. So with these 6 rules, here's my conclusive message to you. Don't let the statistically high likelihood of failure with your goals and New Year's resolutions put you off trying, because the science also says that resolutions are effective. Set yourself up for success using the rules in this podcast. Please tell a friend. If you've got a friend in your life that is struggling with something, there's a habit they want to make or a habit they want to break, please share this podcast episode with them, and hopefully it'll make change in someone's life. I reflect on how that leaving that book at home accidentally had such a big accidental impact. And I give all the credit to my father for actually doing it. I accidentally left the book somewhere, which I had no intention of helping anyone. But he took that book, read it, and to think an idea helped him to stop smoking, which is a goal that he had. For some people, they might love smoking, and that's also fine. All of our goals are subjective. To think that he was able to shake a habit that was not good for his health is much of the reason why I'm doing this podcast, which is this realization that one idea, could be any of these 6 principles or something else that we've shared today, could have that effect on someone that I'll never meet, is the most rewarding reason for staying up. It's fairly late here, it's about 10 p.m. at night, and doing this podcast so soon before New Year's. And remember, and I think this is an important admittance, life is all about failing forward. You, like me, in all areas of your life will stumble. You'll hit hurdles. Life will happen. That's completely inevitable. But hopefully with these principles in mind, you can pick yourself back up again and again and again and again. And, I've had to do this over and over again in every habit that I've successfully formed and the habits that I'm still struggling to form, until such a time when the habits you're seeking to break have been broken and the habits you're seeking to make have been made. And your new behavior is creating the life that you hope and desire to live. This is a never-ending journey, which is something that I've clearly come to learn from my own struggles with forming new habits and breaking old ones. But regardless of the distance, differences, and distinctions, it's important to know that we are all in this together. As a society, if you're more happy, productive, and successful, then just by like a connective karma for us living on the same planet, that will increase the chance of my life being happy, more productive, and successful. We are all in this together. So help each other out, pull each other up, and have empathy for those that are struggling the most. Because as one of my guests said to me on this podcast this year, the truth is, and when we think about that person in our life that's struggling with a habit, if you were them, if you had walked their path in their life and you had their DNA, the truth is you'd be doing exactly the same thing. So the best way to demonstrate your gratitude for being more fortunate in whatever subjective regard that you might be is to lift up those who aren't. I wish you all the luck in the world for achieving your goals this year. And in the spirit of the 6th bonus rule, and because I always end this podcast with a question, here's my very binary, parting yes or no question to you that hopes to use the force of the question behavior effect to help you achieve some of your habits. My parting question is, are you going to achieve your goals this year? Yes or no? Thank you. Quick one, this episode is brought to you by Mercedes-Benz, who recently got in touch to support the Diary of a CEO. I'm becoming quite the fan of electric cars and, of course, a huge fan of Mercedes-Benz. I have one of my own. The Mercedes-Benz luxury electric range, known as Mercedes EQ, is at the very forefront of this industry, which is what really stood out to me. If you're looking for a business car, the sustainability credentials, economic benefits, general convenience, and high levels of luxury, which everybody knows Mercedes-Benz for, in their all-electric cars are truly groundbreaking. In terms of features, their next-generation technology across the range is second to none. For example, there's intuitive MBUX technology with AI that learns your behavior and keeps you connected to the things that matter to you. Not to mention, all Mercedes EQ cars offer exemption from the ultra-low emission zone charge and London congestion charge. So if, like me, you're really excited about all things electric cars, and if you haven't checked out the Mercedes EQ range, then search Mercedes-Benz Fleet to see how they can take your business to the next level. Could you do me a favor and my team here a favor, which is hit that subscribe button? We're approaching 1 million subscribers, and when we hit 1 million subscribers, we've been working for many months to do something very big in which we're all invited to. I'll reveal that when we hit 1 million subscribers. Thank you. Since starting the Diary of a CEO, one of the most popular questions I get asked is, what are your favorite episodes? And what are your favorite guests? Now, I don't think about it in terms of that. I think about moments and insights. So in this episode, we're going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to show you 4 moments from the Diary of a CEO that genuinely changed my life and changed how I think about one of my core beliefs that I then actioned that made my life better. The other thing that you mention in your book, that little voice in your head, is this concept of neuroplasticity. And it says that on the back of the book. It says, retrain your brain for maximum happiness. This concept that we can retrain our brain physiologically seems like nonsense. I can't change my arm. So when someone asserts that you can actually change your brain,
you can change your arm.
I can change my arm?
Of course.
What, a tattoo?
No, you work out.
That's true.
When you work out, you're building muscles in your arms, and that same exact process is exactly what happens inside our brains, and it's called neuroplasticity. The only difference is that you don't see it. You don't see it visibly. You can see your muscles growing because that's the function that they need. They need to grow to perform. But in your brain, what actually happens again, like computers, it's almost as if you loaded a new piece of software, a new piece of operating system on your brain. Literally, for every one of us listening, everyone listening to us right now, at the end of this conversation, their brain will be wired differently than when it started. Every single instance of anything that you do literally rewires the hardware itself. The neurons that fire together wire together. Okay, so imagine the old days of the switchboard. Okay, and Steve wants to call his mom, so you crank your phone, and the operator says, "Hi, how can I help you?" And you say, "Can you please connect me to that number?" And she would literally take a wire and patch you and your mom's phones together. Okay, after a while, the operator constantly, every time you call, you ask for your mom. So the operator goes like, "Why am I even wasting my time on this? Let me just patch that wire to his mom all the time." Okay, so that's exactly what happens in our brains. If you perform a certain function, your brain starts to build networks that make that function easier to perform in the future. If you do it one time, it becomes a little easier. If you do it 20 times, it becomes permanent. Okay, and there are tons of studies. If you take a simple task like tapping your finger on the table, okay, and you're requested to do that, say 20 times every hour, after a few days, you'll find that you're so much better at tapping your finger on the table, and you can do it much faster, and you can do it consistently, and you can do it in the background. Gamers know that for certain. Okay. The problem with neuroplasticity is if you tell your brain to wire for tapping your finger, it will. If you tell it to wire for solving complex mathematical equations, it may take a little longer, but it will. If you tell it to wire for hating people, it will become very good at hating. If you tell it to wire for fearing the end of the world because of what the media is telling you, it's going to become very good at fearing the world.
I know some of those people.
No, absolutely. And you don't want them in your life. The challenge of our modern world is that we think that this brain is supposed to be there to make us successful. Yeah. Okay. First of all, it's not the primary function of the brain. The primary function of the brain is to make you safe. Okay. And then the secondary function that we push as humans to that brain to do is to invent iPhones and create podcasts and have amazing things, right? That's a secondary function. But believe it or not, before that secondary function, your brain is supposed to make you happy, because happy is the ultimate form for you to perform in life. If you're not happy, you're not as effective as you could be at achieving survival. Think about it. If you're grumpy all the time at work, people don't like you. You're not focused. No one wants to help you. You're wasting most of your time, your brain cycles, thinking about the negative, and so you're not innovative or creative, and so on and so forth. It degrades your performance. Happy is a better place for you to be at work, because it will make your customers want to do business with you. It will make your colleagues want to, to help you out. It will make your boss welcome you in their team, and so on and so forth. We are social animals by definition. And we want to have that in our life. And the easiest way to connect and to open up and to discover the world is to be in a happy place. That's a primary function of your brain.
It's hard for some people, because we can all think of someone in our lives who has certain wiring, very stubborn wiring, that almost seems impossible to unwire. And I think we all have that ourselves as well, certain wiring in our brains where something happens and our reaction to that thing might be to catastrophize. It's the end of the world. That's like feels like it's a certain set of wiring where trigger, and then the brain goes through the circuitry and it goes catastrophe, panic.
Yeah. And the answer to that I found was to actually guide that person or yourself, if that's yourself, to the opposite of your wiring. So if my wiring is to look at everything and see what's wrong with it, I should deliberately force my brain to look for what's right with it. So, when I was coming here, it was very busy in the morning. And so I came late, if you remember. And my brain's immediate reaction is, oh, what's going to happen? I'm going to be late for Steve, right? That's the immediate reaction of a brain, because something is wrong. So it looks for what's wrong. I could also say, and what is good about that? What is good about being a little late? He's been recording for the last few days, so it may give him a little bit of extra time.
Do you want to know the truth? I was so happy you were late, because I was late.
Right?
So I was doing upstairs reading that. I was reading the book and I was thinking, I just hope he's like 15 minutes late. And then I'm looking at my phone. I'm like, he's not come yet. Perfect. So I carried on going and carried on going and carried on going. And I just finished as you arrived.
Yeah.
So it's perfect timing.
You see, that is the truth, huh? That's the truth that your brain tries to deny you from seeing. And interestingly, you can train your brain. So basically what you can do is for every negative thought that your brain gives you, task it with the task of giving you a positive one.
Or 2 positive ones.
9, I say.
9.
Yeah, because in reality, if you look at life around you, more than 90% of life is okay. For your brain to contribute more than that as negative is not fair. Right? So if your brain says, hey, by the way, this studio is a little warm, what else is about this studio? My friend Steve is there. The lighting is perfect. The crew is amazing. The coffee is not that bad. You guys got me honey. I can go on for hours, right? And the idea is by training your brain to look for that, what are you actually doing? You're firing the neurons together.
Gratitude.
And exactly, your book basically says it is the answer. Huh? The answer is when you find gratitude. What that gratitude journal that you kept for years every day. What was it telling you? It was training your brain to look for what's right. Your brain every night that you did it was like, okay, it seems he's going to be asking to call his mom a lot more often. It seems he's going to be asking for good things a lot more often. I might as well observe them. I might as well find them. And so, yes, you said some people are impossible to rewire. They're impossible to rewire if they've been practicing a certain wiring for 21 years. It's not going to take 21 seconds to rewire anyone, including me and you. It will take 21 days, let's say, for your brain to recognize I need different wiring. And it will take maybe 21 months for your brain to say, and I don't need the old wiring anymore. Okay. And the game here is, can you actually keep doing that? Can you keep tapping your finger in a way that trains your brain that this is the wiring that you need?
Like, can I keep going to the gym and working on my guns?
Yeah. Believe it or not, the research will tell you that a big part of being athletic is wiring of your brain, not your muscles. For your brain to be able to say, I will go even if I feel a little tired. I will go even if I feel a little busy. I will go and I will do the right exercises, even if the last push is a little painful.
A lot of people will hear that and go, well, what's the evidence for this? What's the evidence for neuroplasticity? Is there science?
Oh, there is a ton of science behind neuroplasticity. Anything from between neuroplasticity and neurogenesis is when, neuroplasticity is to rewire the connections between the neurons, and neurogenesis is to actually create new neurons if you're hit with a ball, for example, and part of your brain is damaged, how we can recreate that, right? If you have a stroke and how you recreate that. And ample evidence, one of the very famous stories is Matthew Ricard, when we spoke about him in the beginning. Matthew's brain looks different than the average human brain. His insula is much bigger in relative comparison. His prefrontal cortex is bigger, and it fires more often. It's simply because of the constant neuroplasticity of, I need you to meditate, I need you to stay quiet, I need you. I mean, some of Matthew's journeys would last 4 years in isolation.
He would meditate for 4 years.
Be in isolation in a hermitage for 4 years, right? And so at that level, your brain starts to do very different things. And by the way, that's not unusual. Huh? Many farmers around the world live in isolation for a very long time. Believe it or not, you and I, when we spend a long time on airplanes, I chose a long time ago to not watch a lot of stuff on I maybe watch one movie, but not the entire trip. The other bits of silence, that's actually a form of meditation. My absolute wonderful friend, Jamie Nelson, the photographer, if you know him, he photographs indigenous tribes. And the way he does it is he would go and spend a few months outside their premises, their village, if you want, in silence, camping out there. He doesn't speak their language. He's just sitting there waiting for them to accept him. And then he would start to, communicate to them in sign language because he doesn't speak their language. And he's one of the wisest people I know. And I said, how did you become this wise? He never studied any of those things. And the reality is because he's in constant reflection and meditation. He's sitting out there and he's spending hours and days in reflection and meditation, right? Because you're sitting alone. All of those things are our habits, and all of us have the chance to do it. So you could be on the tube for a commute of 40 minutes a day, and you could be in that commute cursing life, and that's a very good 40-minute exercise to work and another 40-minute going back. Or you could be spending the 40 minutes in gratitude. You could be spending the 40 minutes listening to music. You could be doing whatever. What you will do for 40 minutes a day will rewire your brain.
It really is like a paradigm shifting thought that our brains are in this constant growth and evolution. But when we look at, as you said, my muscles are changing state, size, growing more fibers to achieve their objective in a different way. And of course, my brain is as well. And when you think about that, it's really liberating because you realize that you're not stuck with who you are.
Absolutely not. So let's choose which parts of it are we going to grow. I think that's the whole point.
And we grow it with our actions and our thoughts.
Yeah, repetitive actions, thoughts, and memories. Believe it or not, one of the interesting things is if you take a memory in the past, and you think about it over and over and over, it's as if it's happening over and over, and you're growing the neurons that are needed, or you're growing the connections between the neurons that are needed to trigger that memory. Think happy memories. Okay? If you sit next to your partner and focus on one thing that they do and go like, they say, do this, they do this, they do this, they do this, and forget that they do 100 other things that you love and appreciate, your neuroplasticity is making you completely obsessed about that one thing. And you can only see that one thing. And eventually, some of my friends after a breakup, I go like, so what happened? And they'll say one thing. It's like they obsess about it over and over because your brain is growing to say, he needs to think about this, right? I'm going to make it easier to think about this. I'm going to make it faster, more accessible.
One of the things I've heard you talk about a lot is your journey and your evolving relationship with sex and sexuality, and how that changed from when you were very young through the period when you were drinking a lot till today. Can you talk to me about that evolution and what you've learned about those topics that might benefit me?
Yes, absolutely. So I'm going to sort of keep referring to my sobriety in that period of my life because it was so transformative and it revealed so much to me, so much that I could have never imagined at the time. So something that also happened when I got sober, I think this was about a year into my sobriety, I realized just how much sexual shame I was holding, so much of it. And I initially sort of wanted to fix it, wanted to do something about it. What are some surface level things that I can do? What can I read? What can I sort of dive into? How can I deal with it from where I am now as a 25-year-old? But I quickly realized that I actually had to trace it back to see where it even comes from. And I realized, just like so many things, it did come from my childhood. Being raised in a Christian home, I learned, again, not directly, more so indirectly, that being a sexual being was not something that was of God. It was not something that was supposed to be a part of who I am. Pleasure was never discussed. Sex was never discussed. Even intimacy in general. I never saw my parents hold hands. I never saw them kiss. I never saw them hug. I never saw any sort of affection. But I knew that they loved each other. I knew that they cared about each other. But affection and intimacy, I just never saw that. Not for a moment. When I sort of wanted to really understand where a lot of the sexual shame was stemming from, or just more so even outside of sex, intimacy, feeling very disconnected to other people when it came to intimacy, but also from myself. I realized that I could only be expressive as a sexual being if I was drunk or if I was high, if I was in that place where, of course, my inhibitions are low, but I had no insecurities. I didn't have to feel like I'm doing something wrong. I didn't have to feel like my pleasure was wrong. But then when I got sober, all of those things came to the surface, and then I had to look that in the eye. So that also became something that I started sharing over time, as well as sort of sharing my journey with sobriety. I then started sharing the things that were revealed as a byproduct of me getting sober, and sexual shame was a huge one, was a big part of that.
My relationship with sex has evolved a lot.
Yeah.
Over time. I think it was in my early years influenced by porn, as it is for many
me
people.
Too.
So
me too.
that's the way I went into the game. I just went in trying to be those male porn stars, you know. And I think over time, and I think there's this wider issue in our society, specifically, I've got to be honest, with men.
Yes.
What they think sex is in terms of this kind of very aggressive, often dominating, transactional encounter.
Yeah.
And then there's, I'm just talking freely here. I don't give a fuck what anyone
Please
thinks.
do. Please.
But I'm seeing a lot in my close friends. They're often in relationships, not all of them, where they're having problems with their sexual relationship with their partner. They're basically saying things to me, and I'd say, this is crazy, I'd say 75 to 80% of my male friends are saying, my partner doesn't want to have sex. She doesn't like having sex.
Yeah.
And I was there at one point too. My partner said that to me at one point too.
Yeah.
And I took it on face value. I thought they don't like sex. What I came to learn is that wasn't true. But what I'd learned to be sex and what I was bringing as sex, this kind of aggressive, whatever, was not the language that they spoke.
Right.
And I feel like I'm surrounded by men that need to start seeing sex as a language, because then you can ask yourself, well, actually she's speaking Spanish and I'm speaking English. That's why it's not she doesn't like English, she speaks a different language. You know what I mean?
Yes.
That's a lot. I'm just dumping that on you to see how it resonates.
No, that resonates so much. And I'm really glad that you said this, because I think you're speaking something that is on so many people's minds, or something that they've just never really put language to. And a big part of my awakening, if you will, and really addressing that sexual shame is because I also learned sex from porn at 10 years old. 10 years old. So by the time that I had sex for the first time when I was 14, it was very much like a porn performance, to put it very simply. And I speak to so many people, men and women, about this very specific thing. A lot of us learn that we should perform, that sex should be driven by orgasm and ejaculation and this sort of production, if you will, which is not actually accurate for most people when it comes to what really actually feels pleasurable, especially for women. So I started to realize when I got sober that every time that I was having sex, for example, I faked every single orgasm. It was all a I didn't know much about my body because I'd learned from porn. And because the men that I was with had also learned from porn, we were just in a performance and no one's actually talking about it. Right? So in times when I was in relationships and I made myself think, I don't want to have sex. I don't want to have sex anymore. It actually was not that. I didn't want to have this type of pornified sex. That's what I actually meant. So what you just said is really important. And I realized that's when I found tantric sex, actually. Yeah, that's when I found tantric sex around 2018. Because I realized that I had always felt like sex was being done to me.
Yes.
That I was not a part of it. And that is how most women feel.
I felt like I needed to apologize
Really?
on behalf of men. Yeah, because that's what I came to learn.
Yeah.
Was that the reason why the person I was with had turned around to me and said, I don't like having sex is, and when we got talking about it after I acted like, let me be clear. The first time she said that, I did not understand. My little chimp Neanderthal monkey brain went, like I was emasculated by it.
Yes.
It made me feel, what, is there something that I didn't
Ego
do right?
steps in,
of course.
right?
Ended up breaking up with this person, got back with this person a year later. When I was maybe a bit more mature, I apologized and I said, I want to have a conversation. And I also said to her that I'm going to be here regardless of whether we have sex or not.
Yes.
And then she had a safe enough space to start talking to me about it. And what I discovered is she'd had 3 previous boyfriends over the course of 7 years. Her view of sex was this person comes and takes from you, treats you like this object. And she was with him for 5 years, treats you like an object, takes what they want from you. And then he was actually going and cheating on her as well.
Right.
So not only was he taking, he was then like hurting her. And that cycle just repeated. Her relationship with what sex is was really, really toxic.
Yeah.
She didn't like that.
Yes.
She didn't want that anymore.
Yes.
And that's what she and me probably referred to as this word sex. So it was kind of like learning a new language of sex and what it actually is. That meant she went from the place of like, I don't want to have sex anymore, to absolutely loving to have sex.
Yes.
And I didn't think it was possible. I thought if they don't like sex, dump them.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And go find someone that will
Right.
that will let me take.
Yes. And you know
so-
what? You've articulated that so beautifully in terms of sex being a language. And it's going to look different for every single person, because something that I realized is that I could tell when I was with a man sexually, I could tell if they were sort of, if it was like a script, almost like a play by play, like this is exactly the method. We do this, we do that, switch into this, switch into that. It wasn't sort of flowing and very intuitive as to what's actually needed in that moment, which reminded me of porn. And I would also realize actually, and this is something that I've spoken about so much because I ended up starting a sexual wellness company called Cherry Revolution over time. And I realized that even some of the positions I would get in were very much like porn, because certain positions in porn are like that because the camera is there, not because it's comfortable, because that's the shot for the viewer to be able to see it. So when I started to see that, I'm starting to replicate this in my most intimate, private moments, but we're both doing it. I made myself believe that I didn't enjoy sex. So then drinking and drugs and everything that came with it, I felt like those were the moments that I could be fully expressive without needing to perform, which is very interesting because you would think it would be the opposite, that I would then perform more. But I felt as if I could actually speak my mind. If I didn't enjoy something, can we try this? Can I do this instead? Or I just want to give, or I just want to receive. Can we be slower? And then when I was sober, I felt like I couldn't say those things, because if I say it to you as my partner, I might be emasculating you. I might be embarrassing you. You might think something is wrong. So I would just perform, and you're performing as well. And then it just causes a huge disconnect. So tantric sex was the first thing that I came across that made me realize and really articulated that sex is actually not a specific destination. Did you know that you can actually enjoy sex without ejaculation, that you can have a full body orgasm, that you can be very slow, that foreplay can be the main thing that you do, that you can experience orgasm without penetration? Just so many different ways of articulating that experience of sex. And it's just that, an experience. And that changed so much for me.
It's such a sort of a narrative violation for so many people who've spent their whole life watching porn and then recreating it. This idea that you can have an orgasm from touch, that you can use energy to cause someone orgasmic pleasure, and it's a really important topic that I think people need to talk about a lot more. And I think just saying to someone that's listening to this that might be in a relationship where they're in a sexless relationship, just proposing the idea that what if you both just say there was 10 languages. What if you're just speaking the wrong language?
Right.
You know what I mean? And what approach would you then take? You'd probably try and learn the language.
Yes.
And also communicate to them what language you speak, and see how you can be bilingual, I guess.
Yeah. You know what? It reminds me of, are you familiar with love languages and that whole thing?
Yes.
I realized that a lot of people expect someone to give in the way that they like to receive. Amen. You know? So no one really says, okay, how do you like to receive love? How do you like to give love? And the moment that I started asking those questions, even though believe me, I fucking cringed in the beginning. I'm like, really? Am I going to ask? But you get used to it.
Yeah. And if they run off, good.
Yeah. Stephen, it's been a game changer to just ask the person that I'm dating, or my current partner, to be like, how do you like to be loved? How do you like to receive love? And how do you like to give it? Because just those simple questions can change so much. And then you can use the same with sex. What do you like and what do you not like? What have you changed your mind about? What do you like to do now and again, or maybe not so much sometimes? How much time do you need? How does your arousal actually work? And I know that some people might not know how to answer these questions for themselves. So it's actually very good to start asking yourself those questions before speaking about it with someone else, because I think we get into relationships and make so many assumptions based on our individual experiences and our worldview. And we expect the person we're with to reflect the exact same thing back to us, but we don't ask questions.
I watched a lot of interviews of you before you arrived here today, and I think in pretty much all of them you said, I'm a normal guy. I'm a regular guy. And I get that. I understand what you're saying. However,
well, it's not false modesty. I'm not going to let people build me into something I'm not, And I think as I get older, I know the frailties more and more, and I'm not ashamed of them. Do you know what I mean? It's okay. Many mistakes, many struggles. It's okay. Otherwise, things become all too, it's hard to relate to,
But you got through SAS selection.
I got through all these,
And people turned to you and said things, and as they turned back and quit, right? That for me is a filtering process of something.
Yeah.
Whatever that something
but
is.
All it is something we can control. It's not a filtering of talent. It's not a filtering of you're brilliant, you're through, you're not through. It's the genius of selection for the special forces. It's all about heart and spirit. And we can all have that. That's not a God-given talent. That's a muscle that builds with walking through the door of failure time and time again and keep getting back up. So I like that. It's why I say I am an ordinary person. That's why I also say just to so many things, because, yes, I pass that, or yes, you reach the top of this mountain, or yes, you do. But it's always just, and that's okay, And it's also often by standing on the shoulders of many giants who have helped me. Many times, if I think of SS selection, that time there were so many times where somebody just kind of believed me in a critical time. It might be something where the two corporals running something go, do we want that guy? Do we want, a bit of luck falls on his side. Somebody backs you, or, you I don't know, just the more I look back on so many so-called achievements, the more I see the hand of good people in critical moments. But as you know, you have to win the hearts of those people in the first place, but also the role of just that dogged determination to keep going. And that's not a thing of being brilliant. It's just trying to keep going, often sliding another step back, but keep moving forward. And you say that to, I've got 3 boys now, 3 teenagers. And I think if you said to them, what one thing does your dad say to you day after day before you go to school? It's always just, don't give up. Never give up. Be kind. Be determined, but never give up. And they roll their eyes. But you know what? One day they'll know that it's a key thing of life. You don't have to be the best to do your best.
Did that resilience muscle, as you call it, grow over time?
Of course. It's like everything. It's like the little seeds to the mighty oaks. How do we build it? Just inch by inch. And that's a great thing, because it's not something only some people can have. It's universal for us all. We can all become, people think it's a God-given gift to someone be resilient. Resilience is that muscle, and you build it by failing and trying to stay positive and trying to get back your feet and going again. I look back and I remember being really excited about being picked for the 4th 11 football team as a linesman. I wasn't even in the team, And it was like, my job was to bring on the oranges at half time, but it was like, and I remember my dad was the only dad on the side of the pitch cheering me on. I thought it was so embarrassing. I'm not even in the team. And Dad said, he's come to kind of, but actually those little steps of like, I'm going to do this, I'm going to bring on those oranges, and you're never going to forget it. It's going to be great. And it's incremental, tiny little things. But having to fight for things, so how often do we see at school, though, the school hero actually in life doesn't always do that brilliantly. And why is that? It's because they've got, schools rewarded that, but they've never tested this. Where little Johnny, who doesn't have that, doesn't get the awards, is a linesman, brings on the oranges, whatever it is, struggles, doesn't even get noticed, never wins anything, but never gives up and keeps doing his best and still doesn't really get noticed, but doesn't matter. But when he leaves school, this might not be the biggest thing, but this is like ninja-like. That resilience muscle inside is strong. And as you know, and as I know, in life, that's the one that is going to carry you further. And the unseen people at school often do better in life. It's like, don't peak too early. Don't peak at 14.
Oh, fucking hell. I certainly didn't. I sat here with Eubank, and I've been thinking about this idea of resilience and what it really means. And as we sit here today, my current hypothesis is basically resilience is this story. It's kind of this contract you have with yourself, this self-story about who you are. And in those moments when no one is looking, I was talking to Eubank about me being on the running machine and knowing I've got 2 minutes to go, because I said before I started I'd run until 45 minutes, but my legs are hurting and they're cramping and I could give up and walk away and no one's going to know because no one's here.
Yeah.
But what I alter my own self-story in a way, and I send a message to myself that I am the type of person that gives up when it's tough. So is it really, do you relate to that? And is this kind of like, you're crafting this story about who you are to yourself with every small decision you make. Doing the linesman job, you said, I'm going to do it the best I possibly can. And although it's not what I wanted, I'm going to give it everything I can and not give up.
Yeah.
Does that relate at all?
And also, I think the thing of giving up is that, you know, what is it? It's that thing of temporary pleasure, long term.
Yeah, that's
not,
so true.
you know, and for me, I developed this thing where whenever people were quitting or complaining, I like those moments. For me, it was like, okay, there's all the chat and the bravado. There's always that at the beginning. Everyone's full of that, but bring it down, put the squeeze on. You know, we're like grapes. Squeeze this, you see what's inside. Bring the squeeze. Now we see character, we see what people are like. And for me, it just became whenever I saw people quitting or complaining, especially complaining, and you see it so much as in the military, you see it on big expeditions, you see it even when we're filming TV shows with people, you know, when it gets hard, you know, and you're hungry and you're scared and you're up against it and you're dehydrated. You know, those are the moments. And for me, it just became a trigger. When everyone's complaining and giving up, it's a time to give more, you know, you don't have to give more in the early times. Just wait until and that's how you separate yourselves in business and in life and in relationship, you know, in the big moments. You know, look at a relationship. When you're under that real tension, everyone's throwing it, you know, are you going to really throw that nasty comment or going to hold it and just try and be gracious and kind in those big moments, you know? And I like that. It wasn't complicated to think about under pressure. It was just like when everything's going wrong, that's the time to give more rather than give up. And I held on to that in many difficult moments, you know, across many different arenas. And it's helped me, you know. I remember this guy said to me once, and you can do anything for another 10 seconds. I like that, you know, when you're in that moment, you keep going another 10 seconds.
That makes you different though. You got to admit, because most people don't want another 10 seconds.
Yeah. So well, it hurts. I'm not saying it's not going to hurt. It's going to hurt. But that fire inside, it's in us all. You know, it's just you got to dig sometimes. But it's a great truth to know that it's there. When you dig, you know, it is there. And I think, as you say, once you get used to it and you start to practice it, the muscle gets stronger. And then you almost seek out tough times. You know, this is a chance to shine, you know. And as you say, that's how you separate yourselves in life. You know, you're going to reach these points, but in those big moments, what are you going to go this way? How are you going to act in those big moments? And it's always what separates, you know, reaching those summits from not reaching those summits.
When you look back on the person you are now and the tremendous wisdom that you've just demonstrated, just speaking to me just then, do you recognize the Mel that couldn't get out of bed, was feeling depressed, couldn't find, you know, described herself as you did as being lazy? Do you recognize that person? And what's at the very essence in the engine room that drove that change? Was it passion? Was it finding your calling? Because I know you weren't this person. You couldn't have been this person.
Well,
when
dude,
you
it's also been 31 years.
True,
I mean,
right.
come on. I've like basically been changing for as long as you've been alive, for crying out loud.
It's
So,
true.
and also human beings are designed to grow
But not everybody seems to, because you have
because they don't understand being stuck.
Yeah, interesting.
See, being stuck is one of the most universal feelings of the human experience, and nobody understands what it is.
What is it?
Oh, it's amazing when you hear this. It's like, pew. So remember how we've talked about how the human beings have this crazy amount of natural intelligence wired into us. And inside your body, we've talked about one of the signals, anxiety. Anxiety is a signal that means pay attention. That's why you go into fight or flight. You're in an alert mode, okay? That's all it is. It's a signal, an alarm system. And your body has a sophisticated system of signals and alarms. And they're all tied to fundamental needs. Anxiety is tied to your fundamental need for safety. That's why it's a signal. Let's talk about your most important fundamental needs. Let's go right back to Psychology 101. Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You need food or else you die. So when you need food, what is the signal that your body sends you?
Hunger.
When you need water, what is the signal?
Thirst.
When you need air, you catching your breath. When you need rest, what do you feel?
I'm tired.
When you need connection, what do you feel?
Lonely.
Human beings are designed to grow. When you stop growing, what do you feel? Stuck.
Yeah. I was going to say stagnant, but I guess stuck is,
Or stagnant.
Yeah.
Or still.
Trapped, I guess, is,
Yeah. Feeling stuck is a signal that you've stopped growing. That's it. And when most people feel stuck, since they don't understand that it's tied to a fundamental need for growth, we believe it's an existential crisis and we blow up our lives. For most human beings, what actually will get you feeling like you're not stuck is having something in the future that you're looking forward to. Or taking a class where you're learning something, or changing a routine so that you try a new class at the gym. Learning anything gets you back in touch with a fundamental need. It makes you start to feel like things are moving. And from that place of feeling a little bit more empowered, you'll be able to make better decisions about what big things need to change in your life.
And is that, you would also describe that as a moment where your life has like an absence of purpose? I think about various examples, Olympians that come back from the Olympics and they're like 80% chance of depression after they've, and then I think about people who have, lost purpose in their lives for whatever reason, been fired from their jobs or whatever, or people that are in jobs that are, absent of purpose completely, that feeling of being stuck. And then we talked also about the importance of goals and ambitions going forward. When humans don't have that forward ambition or that thing to look forward to in the future, and their current situation lacks purpose, they become very psychologically disorientated, would be the way I'd describe it.
I have a different take on purpose. I think everybody's purpose is exactly the same.
What is that?
I think your purpose is to share your true self, to be fully seen. And for the Olympian, when you are training and you're in that arena, that is an experience of being seen. And for most people that are lacking purpose, they feel profoundly invisible. And being seen fundamentally comes back to whether or not you even see yourself. And when you start to feel empowered and you start to see yourself and meet you where you are, what happens is every day that you're able to stand with yourself, to accept where you are, to give yourself the compassion, to give yourself the support and the love and the respect and the worthiness that you deserve, you're going to go out into the world and share more of yourself. That Olympic athlete is sharing more of themselves. And so I think our purpose in life is to come back home to ourselves, to reconnect with ourselves, and to empower ourselves to go back out into the world and share our stories and share our experiences and share our full selves with the rest of the world. And look, if I can save anybody the heartache and the headaches I caused myself, that's a life well lived. If I can laugh at myself along the way, if I can punch a wall and drink a gin martini and then share with you like, okay, this, and then get out. Because how I got out of that, because I could have been in that cycle, the old Mel would have been there for a month. Everybody's out to get me. I never get recognized. Why even bother? It doesn't matter. And it allows me to share in real time that I feel all the shit, but I don't like to stay there. And this is not toxic positivity. It is important when you're disappointed to allow yourself to feel disappointed. It is important when you lose something to give yourself the grace to grieve for as long as you need to. It is important to have a good cry, to have a good scream, it's important to feel the highs and the lows. You're meant to feel it all. But you can shorten the length of time you stay down. And what always helps me is I just kept saying what I've said a couple times during this. I say to myself, I refuse to believe that if I'm a good person and that if I'm working hard, I refuse to believe that this doesn't work out. I refuse to believe that I'm not going to be okay. Like, I know that this moment's going to pass, and I know that I will look back on this moment 5 years from now and I'll see exactly what I was meant to learn. And redirecting your focus to what actually matters. And the fact that you believe in your heart, that you got the mindset, you got the work ethic, you got the ability to figure this shit out and to keep going. And that eventually, if you do, what's meant for you is going to find you. You will be rewarded for all this in the way that you're meant to be rewarded. That's amazing. It's an amazing feeling because you can pick yourself up no matter what happens. I spent so long being dysregulated, having a nervous system that was constantly on edge, like what it felt like to be me any moment in my life, whether I was sitting in a classroom or I was sitting at that law firm bait stamping, or I'm sitting as a young mom with postpartum depression, or I'm sitting in yet another job I don't like, is it felt like being in a car at a stoplight that had a green signal and the emergency brake was on and the gas was floored and I was going nowhere. Like just the engine revved and the sense that I needed to go, but not being able to go. And when I finally started to get control of my own thinking, when I finally started to understand anxiety and how to quiet it in my mind and then how to quiet it in my body, when I finally got serious about understanding trauma and healing it in my nervous system first, through EMDR, through therapy, through guided MDMA sessions, I finally had the experience of being in my body and being safe and being okay. And I hadn't had that in a really long time. And I'm so aware of when I'm not in my body now. I'm so aware of when my nervous system starts to go on edge that my tolerance for staying there is zero, because I lived for far too long feeling on edge, anxious, dysregulated, self-loathing. That when I dip into that space, and everybody, you dip into that space once a day, if not, like I used to live there. And so when I start to dip into that dysregulated, anxious, on edge, intense space, it's like, get this out of my body. We got to get back into my new default, which is grounded, centered, in control of what I'm thinking, what I'm going to do next. And it's a fluid situation. But you just gave me the insight as to why it's so quick for me now. Because I've made a commitment to myself that after spending 30 years that way, 40 almost, that I don't want to live another year that way, another week that way, another full day that way. Now, do I have things that happen in my life that are tough, that put me into a mode where I'm anxious and on edge? And of course. Do I disassociate when I get really awful? Of course. But I now have the tools to bring myself back into my body, to give myself the encouragement, the assurance, the support that I need so that I can face whatever's happening and know that I'm not only going to be okay, I'm actually going to be awesome eventually.
Quick one. As you might know, Crafted are one of the sponsors of this podcast, and Crafted are a jewelry brand, and they make really meaningful pieces of jewelry. The really wonderful thing about Crafted jewelry is it's super affordable. It looks amazing. The pieces hold tremendous meaning, and they are really well made. I think I've worn this piece for almost a year. It hasn't broken, hasn't changed colour, because it's really, really good quality, and it costs roughly 50 quid. People will be surprised when they hear that. They'll probably assume that all of my jewelry is like solid gold and costs thousands and thousands of pounds. But what's the point when you can achieve the exact same effect from a piece of jewelry that's high quality and costs 50 quid? That's why I buy Crafted. Quick one. For many years, people have been asking for a coffee flavoured Huel, and quite recently Huel released the iced coffee caramel flavour of their ready to drink Huels, and I've just become hooked on it over the last couple of weeks. I've been on a really interesting journey with Huel, which I've described and talked about a little bit on this podcast. I started with the berry ready to drinks, then I moved over to the protein salted caramel because it's 100 calories and it gives you all of your essential vitamins and minerals, but also gives you the 20 odd grams of protein you need. And now I'm balanced between them both. I drink mostly the banana flavour ready to drink. I've got really into the iced coffee caramel flavour of Huel's ready to drink, and now I'm drinking that as well as the protein. Make sure you try the new ready to drink flavours. The caramel flavour is amazing, the new banana flavour as well is amazing, and obviously, as I said, the iced coffee caramel flavour has been a real smash hit. So check it out. Let me know what you think on social media. I see all of your tags and Instagram posts and tweets about Huel.